Linebackers, that orange player, he's dropping off of the back as well. So let's say if you've got a curl flat where the running back threatens the boundary flat immediately, boundary corner has to come off of the vertical stem for one. To play that number two, your will can settle into that curl window. If he keeps going, the boundary half is responsible for it. Now your boundary corner would need, until he gets that fast threat into the boundary, he would need to kind of sink or sail with the route. So he's not going to turn his hips fully and run with any kind of vertical stem, but he is going to kind of sink with it and box him out while keeping his eyes on that boundary flat there to make sure that nothing comes and threatens it.
And I think especially once you start getting to 42 empty, being able to play that cut look in the boundary plays with usually the offense is looking for some kind of leverage to throw quick game or to throw multiple verticals. And this gives you a good answer for both there in the boundary. And especially if you get a team whose best receiver is over there, like a lot of the times, like you want them to throw to the quads.
Yeah.
Right? So that's a great way of getting the ball out of the boundary. If especially if you get a team that's going 42 empty and you want to, throw it to number 3 to the field, you want to push the ball out of the boundary. This is where that I think really comes into play. And really, especially kind of going down the rabbit hole of 42 empty, this kind of lets you jump some of the quick game stuff that a lot of teams are trying to throw, and really presents the offense with some challenges. And once we get through these, we'll look at some film as well, and we got a couple of good clips of that playing out the way you do on defense.
And I'm about to get into that because what that does do, the kind of one of the weaknesses in here, you can probably see there's kind of a hole. It's again your classic cover 2 hole shot over the corner and outside of your deep help. Ultimately, if your corner has zone alignment and zone eyes, and his first assignment is that fast 2 to the flat, he ultimately is going to end up giving something up on that vertical stem from number 1, depending on where he's aligned. So what a lot of coaches will do, and I think we're about to get into this in the next slide, is say, well, if we're going to line up with him and have him sink or kind of play that sail technique underneath of him, why don't we just turn and run with it at that point?
Yeah, and that I think is where you get kind of into the details of teaching that corner exactly how you want it played.
Yeah, so that's where things get that's where it gets weird in a good way, a little bit more complicated. But if you can teach it, for my money, it's the way to go. It's a lot more effective. So instead of zones up here, I have drawn up, I should say, cover 2 read, where now your boundary corner is going to align with outside leverage on number 1. He's going to carry him vertical, but he's going to listen for communication from this will linebacker. So when the boundary corner comes off of that vertical stem, he can cut or trap that quick out from number 2. And if the offense isn't expecting it, a lot of times it's a big collision. It's a pick 6. It's usually good things are going to happen for you. Your will linebacker, he doesn't have to cut, or he doesn't have to carry anything, I should say. He doesn't have to carry anything vertically, but he's playing a low inside wall now, where he's going to play that same wall technique that we've got over on the field, but he's playing it from low to high. So if number 1 were to come in on a slant, or number 2 motions out and he wants to come in on a slant or an in, the will's going to wall that off and turn and run with it. Boundary half is just playing 2 to 1 deep, and that's what gives you the flexibility to come off of that vertical stem from number 1, is because you've got the deep help here from the boundary half. So we're going to show some film of this, but I've got it drawn up first. So if the running back is a fast 5 to the field, Your will linebacker is going to, he's still got his low inside wall responsibilities, so he still has to take his initial first 3 steps in his drop to number 1. Once he gets that vertical stem, he knows he's got help on that side, so he can go over now and push the mic off of his high wall responsibility if that's necessary, or otherwise reinforce that coverage to that side, look to cut a low crosser, etc. Your boundary corner, number 1's vertical. He doesn't get an out call or a cut call, or however you want to communicate it. He doesn't get a call to come off, so he just turns and runs with it. With outside leverage, it's really good for taking away like a fade or a comeback or even a deep out there. And your boundary half brackets it from the inside there. Next, we've got a fade out combination, and this is where it gets really cool. So your running back is a fast 2 to the flat. Your will is dropping with inside leverage on him, communicates out, 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 or cut, cut, cut to your boundary corner, who starts to carry number 1 on his vertical stem. And he's kind of blind to this, right? He's just got to trust. If the will calls out, something's there. I got to turn around and drive on it, right? So that's why communication is really important there. Your boundary calf or your boundary corner is going to come off of this route, this vertical stem, and he's going to cut that speed out from number 2. And your boundary half is going to play the fade over top and inside of number 1. There's a small window there in transition, but I think it really takes a lot of arm talent to get it there, especially because you also have the will. Now that he knows he's not that number 2 is not an inside threat to him, he can wall off the new number 2, the most inside guy to him, which is number 1. So he can provide dig help, post help, or just settle in this window to make sure he doesn't curl it up or bang it into that window.
And I think that's where, you're able to, again, if you have multiple different answers. So if you have, if one of your answers is you're going to play the field side rotation, whether it's sky or buzz that we started with, then teams are going to try and attack you in the boundary and go to 42 and get the back out, or, take their shots with the number 1. And then if you add this wrinkle, like you said, now all of a sudden that coordinator is going, great, we're going to, get the back out and go 2-on-2 in the boundary on a fade out concept. And now you have, vertical leverage on the fade and horizontal leverage on the out. And like you said, it's a great way, I think, to create turnovers, because usually when you get these sets, like you said at the start, offensive coordinators are telling their quarterback, if you see this, go here. If you see that, go there, because it's usually so predictable. And then when you're able to introduce, that level of hesitation, it ends up affecting a lot more plays, than just the individual ones you're defending.
Right. And I'm also glad you brought up the cover 3, the field rotations there as well. Specifically the ones that are more sound against the run, because I do want to point out that in a 31 set, your Sam is in a run pass conflict now, and he doesn't really have that boundary half to bail him out. So you either need to cheat your Mike or Will's assignments over in the run game and hope your boundary corner can fill for that, which I would not recommend. Or you have to run this as an auxiliary, like either run it as an auxiliary to another adjustment, kind of this is your passing game adjustment, or just understand that, hey, in 41, we're going to give up the run to stay sound versus the pass.
And you can do that. I did want to point out down and distance.
Yeah, I did want to point out, like, it looks great. It looks like a lot of fun. It's not all that sound versus the run. So I would recommend it not be the only thing you carry.
For sure.
This last one, OCs, you're welcome for this route combination. It's my go-to when I'm playing NCAA is the clear out slant and then the little angle route following it. Now you've got your cover 2 read again. Your boundary half is going to drop. He doesn't really get a vertical stem from either 2 or 1, so I don't have it drawn, but he would eventually come down on top of this slant here. I'd really have him play patiently in case you get some kind of sluggo off of this look, right? Because that kind of gives you the best of both worlds, clearing out that underneath coverage and threatening vertically for a potential home run shot. Your running back, who's fast to the flat now, he pivots and turns his route back inside. So the will places a low wall off of number 1. And now you're probably going to give up a completion here, but the route is still technically bracketed, and your boundary corner is playing that route with outside leverage. So he's maintaining that low outside wall, and the inside and outside walls are just kind of compressing. So I drew this up more to illustrate that concept. And for what it's worth, that's a very tight window to hit. So even though they're open by rule, in terms of execution, that's a tough throw to make. All right, and lastly, or not lastly, but I should say, with having your boundary half high, the other thing you can do is you can play cover 4. I have mod on here. That makes a lot more sense to me. And mod means it means a couple different things to people, or it stands for a couple of different things, but it communicates the same overall concept, which is man on demand or man only deep, I've also heard. Either way, it means the boundary corner is man on number 1 if number 1 has a vertical stem. So that means boundary, vertical stem can be a curl, it can be a deep out, a comeback, a fade, a post, a dig, right? But any kind of vertical stem past 5 to 7 yards, again, that's something you can play with based on your guys in your league. But any kind of vertical stem, your boundary corner is just going to play man on it. I have him playing this man on demand and lined up a little closer to 5 or 7 yards, so that you're not just backed off 12 yards and immediately giving up a quick hitch 12 times a game, especially to someone who's a dynamic athlete here and who can make potentially some plays in space, or a quick screen, like a quick screen to the running back, getting the same overall effect where you've got a dynamic athlete in space there. You want to take it away at least to start with your alignment there. But otherwise, sorry.
Oops, sorry, go back there.
That's good. So otherwise, your boundary corner's got help vertical unless number 2 is out into the boundary as a vertical threat. If he's emptied out, then your boundary half is still he's responsible for that deep zone. He's responsible for him vertical, and it compresses any space that number 1 might have to work with, and kind of limits his route tree in that sense that he can run without any kind of sense or without any kind of help. And then your will is kind of this orange player again. He's dropping off of the running back. Now, because there's deep help, he can kind of afford to play a hook to curl zone and rally to the flats, because even if he ends up missing, he can force it back to his help. If he takes a good angle, he'll have the boundary corner, boundary half, and Mac linebacker all rallying to that flat to help him limit the gain potentially made from the back. Otherwise, if the back releases to the field, you've got your will linebacker pushing to the high wall there. This case, I actually have drawn up this divide route. Your will linebacker is pushing to the high wall. Mac can potentially leverage a fast 5 to the flat there. Again, your Sam linebacker is in a run pass conflict there. So that's something else. If that transition is a little too complicated for you to teach, this is a great alternative. It kind of accomplishes the same thing, but it also has the same strengths and weaknesses. But it also does a little bit better job with this divide route. If you don't trust your Mac to turn and run with a divide too far past the hash marks, having it kind of bracketed with the boundary half playing over top of it helps kind of reinforce that zone as well. All right, now we've got one that the kids will love. It's 6-buzz, where you've got now your will linebacker playing that buzz to the flat. Now, since there's no high help, we have to be in man. There's a lot of if and thens that lead to it, but basically just trust me that you have to be in this look. You have to be in man on the backside there. So that means your will is in man on any fast 2 to the flat. So again, you've got that potential matchup issue. But now you've got the boundary half playing high wall instead of your Mike linebacker. So if that's really an issue for you, if you get a lot of this divide route, your boundary half is kind of sitting here. He's just waiting for it. And you've got a little bit of help on him, debatably, depending how you want to teach it, on your boundary corner. I'd say you can do this one of two ways, where your boundary half is kind of hanging out here at about 8 to 10 yards, looking to take any deep over routes and play post help, or you can have him kind of insert into the box as an extra run fitter to make you sound against the run. So basically you can be sound against 4 verts from this look or sound against the run, but it's probably doubtful that you'll be able to achieve both, because you cannot put someone with both a run and deep pass responsibility. It's not going to work out for you. Sorry, if we go back, I just wanted to illustrate one more thing.
Yep.
Since the boundary half is playing the high wall, frees up the Mac to leverage, or the Mike to leverage the flat there, and your will has to cross over a little bit, probably to the other side of the field, to play his low wall. So this is a weird scenario where those two zones are mixed up a little bit, but you end up with the same overall results. Okay, now this is cover 2 robber, which this kind of lets you play. Again, you can argue that your boundary half is still in the same run pass conflict, but I think he can play a little more patiently. But it's basically the zone version of that we just showed. So what you give up is any kind of cut to your low crosser, except for this Mike linebacker here. So number 4, you probably won't get it. Number 3 or number 2 on a drive concept, you might be able to get it cut there. Otherwise, you have to wait for something, the will to cut a crosser, and that's if the back doesn't release to the flat there, which good shallow cross teams will usually release the back to the same side that they're running the crosser to in order to prevent just that from happening. So what this does is it gives up the crosser. It lets your boundary half play the same poach on a deep over route from number 3 or number 4. And now your will is just playing a zone into flat, so he's kind of picking up a slant from number 1. And your boundary corner, you're a lot more comfortable with him one-on-one with number 1 deep, because he's already playing with leverage to those deep routes, right? So you're defending those deep routes, and you're just giving up potentially quick outs now. That would be the big weakness here, is really the underneath passing game and the quick outs. Also, you're still kind of in a run-pass conflict here, depending what you want to do with the boundary half. I'd be a little more comfortable with him now saying, hey, if you get run action to you, come down and play it and kind of insert to either side depending on which way the backfield is flowing. Because your boundary corner can kind of play that divide route from the top down. So it won't be as pretty. You'll probably give up something, but it's a little more sound, and you can do that versus the last one where you're playing man. You can't. You've got no shot, and that divide is running free with no one picking him up. Right? Okay. So finally here, if you really need to keep it simple for your team, but you really like that, you also like the security that 2 reads or cover 4 potentially gave you, or you don't want to give up either the underneath stuff or the deep stuff to the boundary, and you're willing to sacrifice a little bit of soundness versus the run to make that happen, which is going to happen when you play cover 2 man regardless of the formation the offense is in. You just play cover 2 man to that side, so your will linebackers manned up on the running back if he's fast to the flat. If he's a fast 5 to the other side, he pushes to that low wall. I'd keep him there as a low. I'd probably keep him there as a low wall instead of pushing the mic out of his coverage too much in this particular case, because you've got man coverage now. It helps him kind of chill and potentially defend a slant against number 1 there. So it's almost a cover 2, cover 1, depending on which side the back releases to. But unlike cover 1, you for sure have deep help over the top here from your boundary half. And your boundary corner is man-to-man, so he's covering any quick outs, any hitches, any underneath stuff. He can play his man technique a lot more aggressively because he's got that deep help from the halfback. Now, probably the best way to play the pass, if you really want to create some turnovers, but by far the most complicated. This is really good if you want to play a lot of cover 1 and you're already kind of messing with some man match stuff, some lock, some latch coverage. You play a lot of tri-lock. You can take the same concept of 2 read, where your will and your boundary corner communicate a quick out from number 2 fast to the flat, and your boundary corner can then jump it, and you're really baiting the quarterback into a bad throw there, but you still have all the same security that 2-man gives you aside from that low wall or cut crosser player from the will. Instead, he's got to drop into that window on number 1. And actually, technically, he's taking over man for number 1, but by the time 1 gets to that vertical stem, you will have enough time to get there, and your boundary half should be over top of it as well.
Yeah, I think that's such a – when you're looking at, obviously down and distance plays a huge role in Canadian football. And, if you're facing quads on 2nd and 12, that's a much different look than, 1st and 10 or 2nd and 3. And I think back to your initial point, and what I think makes this presentation so awesome is that you have multiple answers depending on your personnel. Can you play man in the boundary? Can you not play man? Are your guys, do they have a lot of football experience? Are they, are they guys that tend to pick things up quickly, or are they guys that they need a lot of repetition and, they're able to do things well when they've done them, for several weeks at a time? If you might not see quad in your league very much, then you need 1 or 2 answers. But if you see a lot of 31 or 41, right, you can have, this be a bigger part of what you do. So, I think the variety here, you can kind of mix and match, between these different variations of how much do I want to be solid versus the run versus how much do I want to take away the one-on-one in the boundary, or how worried am I about, the number 4 on the diagonal, those types of things. So I think that's, that's awesome. And we're going to kind of turn to some film here. So in this clip here, I know we've been talking about the boundary a lot, but we're actually going to look at the field, the third and second receiver in from the field. Defensively, they're running kind of the matchup principle that Coach Zoll was talking about, playing 3-over-2 in the Canadian boundary. So we're going to look here, and both guys end up going vertical. So just walk us through kind of if you're playing that two read or you're playing that tri-lock coverage in the boundary, and you get two receivers because the running back comes out, how that plays a little bit differently than zone.
All right. So the two things that I really like here are from that corner. If you go back to the beginning of the route, if you look at his alignment and you watch his footwork, that's zone footwork. He's got his back to the sideline. He's able to keep his vision to the field, so that he can maintain his low outside wall position if anything comes out at him. Once he gets that vertical step, he doesn't get the call off of him. He's really able to just turn and run with that with really good leverage and blanket that route down the field. If you also watch the linebacker, he does a great job. He actually lunges a little bit and misses. So you got to kind of take the work term ball figuratively. He ultimately still does a pretty good job turning and running with that route, giving the quarterback a very small window to potentially complete that route. And by the time it develops, the pass rush is there.
So again, we're looking at the field here, and obviously we're looking at the American field, but it really illustrates the concept we were talking about in terms of that corner to the field here is going to be involved in a triangle, whether it's tri-lock or two read type coverage, where he's going to get a vertical and then an out route from the inside guy. As we play it, Coach, if you just want to kind of break down, how he gets transitioned from the vertical phase of being aware of that vertical route like we saw in the last one to jumping this out. And you can see how, physical the result is for the defense.
Yeah, so to keep it paused for a second here, actually, if we can wind it back to the top, I just want to quickly point out in this one, the corner is aligned on the inside of that route. That might be either a disguise on the part of Kansas if they're trying to disguise what coverage they're in, and he kind of shuffles out to it later. Or they might just be playing on a simple divider rule. Because it's all the way out to the field there, it generally never makes sense to play outside leverage to the field. But ultimately, we do still want to, when we're playing this in the boundary, in the Canadian field, we for sure want to keep that outside leverage unless it's something ridiculous. So you can play the clip now?
Yep, I'll roll it through once and then I'll just keep rewinding it.
All right. So on this one, it's a really quick, and I think he's actually kind of cheating the route concept if you look at his eyes, but ideally it's more of a communication from the will linebacker there, and he plays it a little more blind. But he gets that out call, the safety comes, he's a little bit late there, there's kind of a window. Corner gets the out call, they throw the out pretty blindly. Corner comes up and traps that out route. It's a really good, really physical result. He gets there a little later or a little earlier. It's still a really good result, or potentially even a pick six, because there's no one in front of him if he gets possession of that ball. The other thing I want to point out here is this linebacker runs with the out route for a really long time. Really, as soon as he makes that out call, what he needs to be doing, so as soon as he breaks out, what he needs to be doing is dropping into that window between the numbers and the hash at about 10 yards to buy his safety enough time to get over top of that vertical route. So this is both an illustration of something done really well and something where the linebacker needs to get underneath of that route by number one and into that hole.
And that way, if you get, your kind of high-low concept, your boundary half in the Canadian game in this case would be getting over top of that, and now the linebacker's underneath in that dig window, forcing the ball to have some air on it so that the high player can make a play on it.
Yeah, absolutely.
So here we're actually going to be looking in the boundary. This is TCU, again, playing 3/2. So we're talking about when coaches break down those coverages, looking at the cover 6 or the boundary rotation stuff, and whether you're playing, cut, or you're playing two-man match or two read. Again, we're looking to distribute those routes in the boundary with 3 players. So here we end up kind of getting multiple in routes on different levels, kind of like a drive concept, and you can see kind of the inverse of the previous clip.
Yeah, so on this, the V gets a kind of nifty little switch release in there, which that looks pretty tough to cover, but you've got your corner. He's maintaining his outside leverage. He's looking for a stem deep. Once he sees both routes breaking inside, he's able to play with his outside wall leverage over top of, it looks like the deepest one in this clip.
Yep.
Yep. And because the will linebacker is trusting him to take care of that, the boundary safety has the route bracketed to the inside. The will linebacker can do his job as the low inside wall. And instead of being influenced by that over route, he can stay put right in the window and again deliver a really physical, really good result here in the quick game.
And again, this is when we're talking about if a team ends up either releasing the back into the boundary. So in the Canadian game, it might just be a shoot route into the boundary, or this is 42 empty, right? So now we're getting our 2 receivers. So you're in your quads check, or you've made your adjustment to the formation based on the fact that it's not a balanced formation. And now you end up with that second receiver out there. And that really makes you solid against really everything that, the offense could give you. I think a huge point here too is the corner obviously needs to stay outside leverage. Whenever one player declares that they're going to go in or out so that they have a horizontal break, now we have a 2-on-1 on the vertical route. So if this became, say, post corner, now that corner, the free the boundary half here can be all over the post route because he knows he's got help from the corner on that if that becomes a double move. Same thing as on the last one. We talked about the linebacker getting underneath the safety, right? We end up with a 2-on-1 on the vertical.
Yeah, and the corner also, he's really patient. Looks like he's giving up a lot of space, but he's really just maintaining the leverage that he needs to maintain in that scheme in order to stay sound versus that post corner or that double move, right? So in this clip, we get a pretty similar look that stays mostly static. The front side in our cover 3 hold. You can argue if you don't have that second flat player in the middle of the field there, that it's cover 4 instead of cover 3. I'd say that's more semantics or nomenclature at this point. What I want to point out here is you've got both number 1 and number 2 on the bottom of the screen vertical, and the corner is dropping deep to his landmark, and he's splitting both of those routes in half, even leaning on number 2 a little bit because the ball will take a lot longer to get down to number 1. Now he's also got a little more help than we could anticipate, which is fine because we'll have a little more room to recover than they will. But that overhang really cuts and carries that slot, which is awesome if you can do, but it's nearly impossible on the Canadian game. When that guy's got a 10-yard running start, you really can't cut and carry from the flat on any receiver with a waggle. It's really hard to do. So in this case, that field half would reroute it outside to his corner help, and then he'd actually be settling down and looking for this quick route. He'd have leverage on this back coming out of the backfield in the middle of the field there. So that route that kind of comes open, your linebacker would need to get where your field half is, but then your field half has leverage on that out on that fast. In this case, it's a fast 3. For us, it would be a fast 3 or fast 4 coming out of the backfield.
Yeah, that gives your guy a chance there too to like 70-30 those two routes, right? So he can be on top with the width
I
in his
really,
back.
feel for my, yeah, I really feel for my money. Um, you need to be sound against the run, especially versus these isolation sets. But I really don't think you need two guys to leverage the flat in the to the field in the pass game, because our field half, since we can't really cut and carry with him, we might as well have him leverage that fast five, that fast four, and do a really good job of that, and then we can stay sound a little more deep. All right, if we wind it back. So here we've got, on a Canadian field, some USPORT film, Laval is playing that cover six cut adjustment that we were talking about. And you see the boundary corner here maintains his outside leverage. He does a good job kind of sinking and sailing with the route. So if they want to dump it off to that back in the flat, he can rally to it with outside leverage and force a vice tackle between him and the will linebacker or the Mike or the free safety or whoever's coming to help him there. But his bigger concern by far is that corner route, because the boundary half needs to. Now this is probably a Laval specific thing. I probably wouldn't have the boundary half going that deep. I'd have him probably coming down on top of that corner route and playing it from the top down.
It's more of a
That's
curl.
a little better illustration of what that's supposed to look like. But the corner still does a really good job of utilizing that sail technique, getting his back to the sideline, and playing that high-low conflict from the top down. Right? You got to give up a deep route or a short route. You're always giving up the short route 10 times.
Here we have it out of 31. Another U Sports game. You see how low the half is? I think this is, a good point for when you're talking about being solid in the run. Obviously Western's a team that can really run the football. So you see that Sam and the field half both low in that field, flat, more of that like buzz style to the field, and it gives you more of a presence in the flat.
Yeah, for sure. And your boundary half alignment, if you run it back to the beginning, that looks a lot more like it would be when you're running that robber. So he's a few yards behind the linebacker, but if he gets that immediate run action, he can kind of slow play the run, let the linebackers really fill downhill if they get that run action, and then kind of come late to the party to clean up whatever might happen. In robber, though, the boundary corner would be a lot higher. It looks like in this scenario he's either manned up or just in a cut and carry. Again, if you trust your guys to do that, awesome, power to you. But that's I would not be running a look like this where you've got a corner low without any deep help before the sports level, I think, unless you're just saying, screw it, like my guy's better than your guy, let's play ball.
I think here you actually kind of get that diagonal, and you see how that boundary half. And again, we're not talking to the coaches here that are actually running this look exactly what they're trying to do. But you see how just in this, the reason I like this clip is for that robber. You see the options you have with that boundary half, right? He's in a position where if you wanted him to, he could play deeper earlier and help over the top, and then you're playing more of that two-read style. If you want to play that kind of poach look, right, if you want to, like you said, take your shots with that boundary corner, now he's in a position to rob that diagonal route, and your free safety can still be solid, to the field seam. So it just shows you kind of the variation options you have in that sense.
Yeah, and what this look actually reminds me of is something I didn't really draw up, but it's more of an American mod or even press quarters type of look, where you've got both the boundary corner and the boundary half, in that case, like a safety, they'd call it. you've got them both playing relatively low, and that safety is responsible for, at the very least, being post help, and bracketing any insight and bracketing any deep route from number one on the inside. But he still aligns close enough to the box where he can be a fitter in the run game and let your linebackers really play flow instead of having to worry too much about misdirection or anything else happening in the run game.
The other thing I think you see here, and it's obviously different based on each coach's preference. How far do I carry routes? How concerned am I about getting hands on? Those are all personal preferences. But you see here, the Sam is actually able to. He does a great job, and he's actually able to get. When we talked about that dig window, right? He's now been able to close on that dig window, and I think based on talking to you and knowing you a little bit, your preference. I know a lot of coaches, and I'm tend to be like this some ways, especially on 2nd and 8. They want to show the quarterback this flat route, drive it, tackle it, we're good, right? But you see here how if your Sam can do this good of a job on the dig, this guy might be able to be a little less, vertically conscious and, like you said, leverage that in the flat, right? And now you're really solid to the field. If you pause the picture right there and you're saying, hey, I got this, post safety and we're taking the one-on-one shot backside, we're maybe giving up the fade, but I like my corner. I've got, the diagonal killed. I got, whether this is post or seam, I've got it viced, and I may even get some late help over here with that safety, right? I've got the dig eaten up with leverage, and I got the out route eaten up with leverage. And that's one of the tougher concepts to handle in 31. You see the value in it there.
Yeah. In the American game, they talk, when you flood the coverage, they talk about you actually give up that immediate flat presence that we're able to maintain with field half. And they'll have that player usually play a curl to flat. So he'll play the curl first, the curl zone first, and then kind of rally to the flat once like a fast three or a quick out kind of declares itself. But sorry, can we go back to that look for a sec? I lost my train of thought. So they'll play that kind of curl flat instead of just having him be in a hook to curl responsibility, because all the looks I showed have that field half low. That's automatic leverage on the running back, and I just don't feel like that a second flat player is all that necessary, right? Your extra run fitter is, but as a flat player, you don't really need that.
Looking here at this last one, and I think that this is a concept that sometimes, people need to see a few times to really understand. I think this clip really shows it well. Here, it's a tight end as the number 2. So again, obviously here we're talking about 3-by-1 formations or 4-by-1 formations. So this second receiver would be the back out of the backfield, or a fullback, maybe that releases from a 31 set. Okay, but you see here how the boundary corner is going to trap this out, right? He's syncing with the vertical concept of 84 here up the seam. He's got vertical help from the safety, and now when this guy comes out, he's now going to drive that. And what we should see is this linebacker helping get underneath the curl, and ultimately, they go to throw the out and they get it jumped and take it the other way.
Yeah. So that is a really good illustration of the trap corner, and you actually pointed this out earlier, because Gesicki there, I think it is, he runs more of a bang than a true out and influences that will. His first job is to play that low inside wall, so even if he's late to bracketing that number 1, and he should eventually get there and open up instead of chasing the out route, that's still on him. He should be trying to drop underneath of that route from number 1, but he does a good job of walling off that initial inside stem from Mike Gesicki there. And that kind of influences him to be late into his drop a little bit. So that part is forgivable. It's turning and running with out route that you gotta get him to instead turn around and try and find number one.
You actually, and I didn't even see this the first time because obviously I'm looking at the pick. But if you look at number 9 to the field, they're actually playing the same like trap 2 coverage to the field, and they get the same route combo. So they get a little bang, and whether it's dig or curl, it's hard to see because it doesn't develop that long. But if you watch 9 when he gets the out, he's less. Now I know the ball's been thrown, but he kind of flat foots right now. He's not, he's not chasing the out. He's staying in that window so that when this becomes a dig or a curl, right, the safety's got it vertical and the backer now has leverage on it on the inside.
Absolutely.
Awesome. Well, Coach, I really appreciate your time and the time that you put into, setting that up and going through all those options. I know it's something that we spent a lot of time talking about, trying to find answers to these ISO sets. And, I think the main answer we came to is that you need more than one, and you got
100%.
You got to be able to tailor it to what the offense is seeing. So, I don't think anyone's going to run all, 8 or 9 of those variations, but you got to just kind of look at, because I've played teams too that run quad that don't flip their wide receivers. Right. So maybe they're running it more to get an advantage in the run game to the field, or, they like throwing bubble screen. So I've played a few teams where, normally I'd be very, conscious of the boundary one, but if that boundary one's not their best receiver, then you're going to play things totally differently, right? Or if it's 2 back and, they never throw to the field wide out, well, you can probably manage, not being as heavy to that field side and being solid against the run and not giving up the one-on-one to the boundary. I think that's the great thing that coaches can take from this.
And I think the more film resources, the more meeting time, the more practice time you have, the more of this stuff you can potentially run at a time and really try and cover your bases. But if you're just struggling to find an answer and shore up your defense, so you're not, so you don't have a bunch of empty checks, so you don't have a bunch of quads checks, but you're able to adapt your base defense to these overloaded sets. That's what this is really about. Is I know if guys go back and watch kind of your quarters variations tape, you actually go over a lot of like the 2 read or man match stuff there as well, or you've got a lot of stuff on quarters. There's a lot of stuff out there on cover 3. So this is a lot less about here's a cool new scheme that you can run to solve these kinds of problems, and a lot more to me, putting this together, this was more about here's how you can take stuff that you already run, or it's another argument to maybe run that to both the field and the boundary. Here's how you can take concepts you already have and provide yourself multiple answers to challenges you might be presented through those different concepts.
Yeah, that's awesome, Coach. And again, the level of detail there is amazing. So really appreciate it. And, good luck. I know there's a lot coming in terms of, your next couple months with football and heading down to Ohio. So, enjoy that and stay well.
Really excited, man. I'd do this all day, every day if I could. Thanks for your time.